Hannah is a RRR participant, but so much more. She's an incredible illustrator, and I am gonna, if I can, there is Hannah's. Oh, I've actually just sent that to you, Hannah. One more. There, Hannah's website in the chat. An incredible illustrator. The inspiration behind the maker of Make Your Mark, the book, which highlights women in tech and STEM. Is that right?
Yeah, tech and design, just in general as well.
It's an incredible gathering of illustrations and interviews. You should check that out. But check the website out. Absolutely sensational work. And that was Hannah's illustration that you seen when you came in, and that was designed in response to a piece of writing by Niamh. Is that right, Hannah?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, look, that's enough from my blathering. I'm going to leave you two to it, and I'll if you guys keep the chat going and keep questions flowing and tell us where you are and all that stuff. I'm going to leave you two to it.
Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Stephen. Yeah, I'm really excited for today because talking to Niamh McNally. Niamh's a poet, activist, and just generally all-round lovely human being whose work focuses mostly on nature and climate change, and she's done projects with the NI Human Rights Commission as well. If you want to look that up online, it's called It Seems, and it's amazing watch. I think it's on YouTube. And yeah, as Stephen was saying, the work that you saw when you come in was a piece that I created in response to Niamh's amazing poem, The Lighthouse, which I think she's going to read for us now.
Yes, I honestly cannot stop looking at the lighthouse like that you drew. It's honestly stunning, and it captured the essence of the poetry just unbelievably. I loved it so much. So this is my poem, The Lighthouse, and it was originally written, it was actually only written like last month, and it was the fact like I've always been kind of low-key obsessed with lighthouses, have one on my ring, and I always think lighthouses are this kind of beacon of hope. But when it does come to pass that it will happen with the climate crisis, if a lighthouse is underwater, I feel like hope is gone. A lighthouse is like the reason it exists is to like ward off boats from land. But if that land doesn't exist anymore, it won't be there. It won't have a purpose. So this is my poem, The Lighthouse. And thank you again, Hannah, for your unbelievable drawing. The lighthouse needs stacked with a few more stripes, another layer of red, white, to lift the head higher and push its sight above submerging waves. She searches for help, armless, gargling salt water, panicking through the suffocation. Tear ducts flood as light struggles to stay on, like slapping a dying torch with your palm. A hopeless hand, the batteries have drowned. Your stripes are wavy underwater, loose in the subsurface, useless through the dark reflection. Your lantern pane will become a cage that fish swim in and lay eggs on, the iris you once protected with a metallic eyelid. No boats are coming. No warning is needed for land of serrated rocks below sea level. Inhale quickly, breathe in, blink for the last time. Thank you.
Oh, I just love that. Like when Niamh sent me like a stack of her poems and was just like, yeah, go for it. Just like pick one you like. And just that amazing imagery of like a lighthouse, something that's meant to be like a warning signal underwater is just, it's surreal. That's probably one of my favorite poems out of the stack you sent over. I love it so much.
Thank you. I'm so glad you chose that one. Like I was just buzzing when you said you were, and I was like, oh my goodness, because it's the imagery, and I was like, this is gonna look so cool as an illustration, and I couldn't have imagined it going better. Like I just can't stop looking at it. I want it like tattooed on me.
There's so many like layers to it as well, just that kind of imagery of like the fish laying eggs in the glass and almost like nature kind of reclaiming the lighthouse even when we're gone, like post climate change. It's just amazing. Obviously, like climate change was the inspiration for this piece, and I'm just wondering what like place do you think that poetry has in the climate discussion?
Poetry, like honestly, I feel like poetry is the best medium for any type of kind of, if it's a revolution, if it's a movement, it's going to be at the forefront. I think it takes, not speaking for myself, but people that think in a different way, as opposed to, you know, just treading those like we're listening to John Barry yesterday, probably quote him a lot today, but just like treading those like capitalistic lines, you know, there's kind of like the rat race. And I feel like a lot of poets look at things in a different way and try to express it in a way that, you know, is empathetic, and you can maybe look at something and feel that way. Yeah, so I have a really great quote. I've got like loads of quotes written down just for today, and there's a quote by Jonas Mekas, and he said that in the very end, civilizations perish because they listen to their politicians and not to their poets. And I think that that's a great way of looking at it. Also, like with Amanda Gordon, you know, with her inauguration poem as well, it's always at the forefront of change, and she does an amazing video called Earthrise as well, which is a climate poem. So any kind of poetry, I think, is at the forefront and definitely should be part of the climate discussion. Well, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, like it's almost like an inherently kind of political issue. And I
Yeah.
think we're gonna have a few kind of interactive pieces today throughout like us talking, so like polls and things like that. And I think Stephen, if you can start one of the polls there for if people think that poetry and politics should be separate, because you know, like some people think that it's an inherent part about it. I guess others maybe are tired of it, like, you know, they just maybe want to, you know, read like Wordsworth a poem about some clouds and stuff as like an escape from the politics. So I'm just
Yeah.
interested, you know, obviously it sounds to me like you think that they're, you know, inherently linked.
I definitely do. And if you kind of look throughout all of like history, any kind of any kind of like revolution or any kind of movement, like I said, had their poets, you know, from the very beginning. And one of my like favorite, I'll talk about like in a wee bit just about influences and stuff, but one of my favorites is like the Beat Generation. They were just a movement of people that thought differently and wanted to, you know, create change. So they're totally interlinked, I think, but let's see what everybody else says.
Yeah. Like, I don't know, can we get the results up? Oh yes, amazing. So yeah, overwhelmingly 95% of people said that poetry and politics shouldn't be separate, with 5% saying yes, they should be. So that's like overwhelming response. People totally think that it can be like a tool for politics. That's amazing.
Brilliant.
You were just saying there as well about influences. I was wondering if you could share maybe some influences or resources for people, you know, the people who've responded to the poll who maybe want to know more, want to get more involved in poetry and politics.
Of course. So see with regards to poetry, I feel like I'm sometimes bad at like recommending things because a lot of the time it doesn't really come from a writer per se. Like I will just be like inspired if you stand outside and I'm like, wow, you know, and that's what I write about. But if you want to look into kind of nature writing, you can start. I actually have a list because I always forget. People always ask me for recommendations and I always forget most of them. So if you're looking at nature writing, you can look at like the transcendentalists. So you've kind of got like Henry David Thoreau with Walden, like early novels. They were nature writers, not necessarily like eco poets, but they were like nature writers. You've got yeah, Emerson, like Walt Whitman and stuff like that with Leaves of Grass. And then if you move through to like the beat poets, you've got people like Ferlinghetti or Gary Snyder with Gary Snyder's probably the biggest nature writer, you know, eco poet of that time. And then like a lot of my influences are very close to home as well. So I love, like I'm so obsessed with like Seamus Heaney. I think he's amazing. And my influences for form kind of come from the modernist era, you know, with the kind of experimental poetry where you like flip stuff on its head or cut and stick or, you know, write on the other side of the page. But a lot of the time I'm influenced by writers like Heaney about nature and the land, and it's so integral to our experience here. And also like contemporary, like I'm so like see Dara McAnulty, he's so good. If you want to go and read his book Diary of a Young Naturalist, it's amazing, and it just puts into perspective this kind of new wave of nature writers, especially here in Northern Ireland. But yeah, any if you want to go into like Waterstones, No Alibis Bookshop, Oxfam Books, just go in and pick up a poetry anthology, really. That's all I can say. And whatever you think you're drawn to, go for it. I don't know if you're the same, Hannah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like inspiration, especially from nature, is a big one for me, like within my illustrations and like especially in the illustration response to your work as well. Like it's almost important to get inspiration from places that aren't the same as your work, if that makes sense. So like, you know, you obviously writing poetry, you'll be reading like books that aren't necessarily poetry anthologies as well, and you know, getting out into nature and taking inspiration from everything. That's so
Definitely.
important.
That's definitely true. And one inspiration, and I was going to say, because just like reading poetry throughout today, but because I was like so inspired by Seamus Heaney, I wrote a poem called Eating Oysters for the first time at Greencastle, and I was talking to you about it. And it was basically, I was up in Greencastle and I had an oyster, right? Because someone told me they were vegan. Not too sure if this is true, because they don't have a central nervous system or something. I was like, okay. But there was a poem that Heaney wrote in Fieldwork, which is like a really great anthology. And it was about oysters, kind of, taking something from, the sea and just like using it and kind of exposing of it. And a lot of the time my if you want to call it like eco poetry, comes from like nature writing and like what we do and how we treat the natural world. So I can read this one if you want, and then another poem just about animals and how we treat them. So this is Eating Oysters for the first time at Greencastle after Seamus Heaney. Viciously shucked with expert ease, the oyster reveals plump plasma, a snottery act slurped back, divulging pure verb, a salty privilege. Front teeth scrape lustrous enamel, shaving a pearly mantle, prehistoric protection forced onto its back, smothered with exotic lemon, le petit baton rouge spice that stains the calcium coat, a battered grey sea divot shell exposed on an icy bed. So that's that wee poem. And like on for that, like I don't know if you're the same, Hannah. See when you're like drawing, if you're like in a headspace of like, you're like inspired by that, so you kind of go on to write something else. I kind of wrote this poem after writing about oysters and how we kind of abuse or look at the natural world. Thank you. So it was this poem I wrote, More for Us, and it's kind of like I looked out at the tree and was like, there was like a birdhouse that was made from wood, and I was like, that birdhouse is made from wood, so someone's cut down a tree to like make a birdhouse made from wood, which was the bird's original tree house, right? So I was like having all these like, why do we do that? And why as humans do we think that's okay? So I wrote this poem called More for Us. And I said, cutting down a tree to build a birdhouse is more for us than them. Sitting back, watching them pack clean seeds. Look over and thank us, little birds, for cutting a hole big enough to peek from the house. Appreciate the flat ledge you can sing on in front of a neatly trimmed hedge. A shelter of stable wood panels replaces the shriveled branches, meticulously positioned, never the same twice. A mossy indentation is exchanged for a metallic bath. Let us train you with an echoing hollowed box, dimming your refrain. Houses, baths, bowls, cutting down a tree to build a birdhouse is more for us than them. That's how you.
That's amazing. I love the fact that it's like that kind of, you're taking somebody's work like Seamus Heaney, and when I'm going to be inspired by that, but these are my experiences and these are my kind of observations of what's happening at the moment, and that both of those were sparked off from that as class. And obviously people in the chat are absolutely loving it as well. So yeah, I'm totally not alone in loving that. Yeah. I absolutely love that. I'm so struck as well by like when I listen to your work, I totally I get it, and I can hear that kind of very strong climate conversation. I really do relate to that. And for me, it's just such a big contrast from like how poetry is almost taught to us in schools, and through the education system, how English is represented as almost like an old art form where you're reading like old poems and not necessarily knowing why or how you should relate to them. And just wondering about your experience of that and your thoughts on the education system and how it treats poetry.
It's so frustrating because honestly, like poetry is such an amazing thing, and I feel like a lot of people are just like torn from doing that from a very young age. If it's the board in school and they're maybe reading poetry, that not to like diss any poems that are like taught in school, but sometimes they're not the most exciting or engaging, and like you're kind of put off it as like pursuing that career, especially if it's English, if it's poetry. But see anybody that was in like my master's class or whatever, they've done like exceptionally well. Like if you study English, if you study art, it's amazing. And like my sister, for example, is studying in Arden drama school, and she's doing amazingly from the arts. And I think people are just so they end up going like, let's study business, let's like come away from the arts and leave it. So that's like my opinion, and everyone kind of laughs at you when you go and say you're going to study English, for example. I don't know if that's just my opinion or
Well, we're going to find out because I think we're going to have another poll moment. We're going to ask, has the education system ruined the enjoyment of poetry, novels, or plays for you? And I think, yeah, me, definitely. I
gonna
did.
say no, maybe because I'm doing it. So I'm maybe actually, I don't know. I'm gonna say yeah, actually.
Yeah, I ended up like not going into an English-based, degree or anything to do with it, but I always loved reading and I always loved writing. And GCSE English was awful. I didn't enjoy hardly anything we read, didn't relate to a lot of the work. And yeah, and definitely what you're saying about people thinking, that you can't pursue it as a career or that it's not worthwhile, that very capitalist view is totally true. Like no careers advisor in a high school is saying, oh,
Yeah.
go out and become an environmentalist poet.
I know it's one of those ones as well, and it's like you still try to like justify it, even though you're doing things. You're like, it's still good, getting a voice out there, trying to inspire, and people are like, but what about economics? Like, would you ever think of going and doing this now? And I'm like, I don't think so. I don't have the brain for it either. It's just I've an opposite brain to that kind of job or lifestyle. And
Yeah, we've got the poll results back, and again, yeah, 75% of people said yes, it ruined the enjoyment of poetry and plays. 25% said no, though, so that gives me hope that some people got a really class education with poetry and
100%.
reading.
Yeah.
There's hope.
Yeah, totally. Like for example, like in my school, I went to St. Louise's, and the teachers were like brilliant. I really think it depends on the teacher as well. Because I have people like they've told me that their English teacher was just so uninterested, and I think that really makes a difference across the board, but especially with the arts. You don't want to be sitting through like a poetry class and be like, falling asleep or whatever. So it
Yeah.
definitely depends on the school, I think, and the teacher. But look, 75% said it was ruined, so that's really, really heartbreaking.
Yeah, it is. And I think as well, there's kind of like a parallel almost between how kind of schools are reflecting how society values both the environment and poets or that kind of art form. It's like if it's not for capitalism, it's not valued. So there
Exactly.
is definitely a strong parallel there, I think.
Like if you're not doing the kind of, we kind of call them like sensible subjects, if that makes that was the kind of idea you had when you were in school, that you needed to go out and then maybe get a job and get a good job and get like well paid and build your way up. So I think you're right. It is that kind of societal view that we should be doing that rather than what we want to do.
Yeah, and another question that we're going to put in the poll here, because it's kind of related to what we're talking about, is have you ever been deterred from pursuing education and slash or a career in a creative subject? Because obviously the careers advice, and this is whether you ended up in a creative subject or not, because you listened to the advice or you didn't. But I think that, yeah, like we're almost told to do this creative to do the sensible subjects and have a backup and not focus on having a career as a writer or as an artist. And I think it's ironic we're talking about that thing here as two people who very much didn't listen to that advice.
I know, I know, you're so right. But then it's like, yeah, you're just right, and you're meant to have like a backup, and maybe that's a good thing as well. But I honestly, I'm so in the opinion that if you just like go for it and you try your hardest, you will get there. You know what I mean? Like sometimes I think having a backup, kind of having a plan B. I know it's sensible, but it also makes you kind of think, oh, I have a plan B. Like, see if you just have a plan A, go for it. Like, there's no stopping you really.
That's very inspirational as well. It's like, yeah. Oh, here we go. There's the poll results. Have you been deterred from pursuing education or career in a creative subject? 86% said yes.
That's
That
great.
is mental. And I am totally in the yes category myself as somebody who is told that I should not do even GCSE art, that was laughable. Yeah. Or, that there's no career in that. There's like 14, yeah, we've got Stephen Miller saying big up the 14%. Yeah, the 14% that weren't deterred, you go for it.
We're all here.
Yeah, I just think it's a shame because there's so many people out there, probably even like yourself, who create amazing work when given that opportunity and given the chance to share it.
Definitely. Oh, I'm just
We've
gonna,
got comments saying parents first and foremost deterring. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
Definitely.
I agree. Yeah, and there is a pressure there as well. Like if you kind of obviously going to uni and stuff, you can get grants and loans, but if you're getting like if you're having to take money or you're not being able to afford it, it's good to do the sensible thing. And parents tend to push in that direction, and fair play to the ones that don't and like, listen to their kids and like want them to do what they love. But unfortunately that's the society we're living in.
Yeah,
Definitely.
again, very kind of capitalist focused,
Mhm.
and things like poetry and the environment that aren't inherently profitable at the moment,
I
they fall by the wayside.
I agree totally.
Yeah. And
Mad.
how do you think that might change going forward? Do you have any hopes for the future about how that might be different?
Yeah, like this is something I've kind of been thinking about. I remember a couple of years ago I read this article and it was like apparently like schools were just going to get rid of poetry. I don't know if anybody else like heard about this. And it was like such a thing, and I was like, I can't believe this is happening. But I think one of the positive, I know if you can say that, it's such a weird thing to say, but with COVID, it made people kind of rethink what they enjoy doing. It's like, what are the things we miss? We miss going to plays, we miss going to the theatre, we miss going to the cinema, all these different entertainment things as well. Not if you just like obviously are in the arts for entertainment, but I think it puts it into perspective that things will change. And I think we know that like of course it's going to change. Like if we miss all these things, we're humans. Like I feel like art's what gives us like a soul, it kind of it's what drives us. But also I know like as moving forward, there are things that are changing. Like, see if you're a poet or a writer, a novelist, there's so many magazines and journals now, like online. See if you even type into Twitter, like journals submission, like submit like submissions, whatever. It'll give you a list of places that are like taking poetry submissions, and you can do that there and then. And I think like things are changing, and people are like with young people specifically, they're like getting that voice and they're putting their work out there. So I hope the arts and also like if it changes like funding as well, that's a big issue with arts.
Yeah, just what you were saying there with the start of lockdown, like people were consuming like so much more of arts content online and really missing that. And one thing that struck me, it felt like a bit of a slap in the face, was when the government in the UK sent out that thing where it's like, Fatima is going to retrain in cyber. And that kind of
Yeah,
pushed that people who are working in arts careers,
yeah,
because of the pandemic, it's like, oh, too bad, so sad, you need to
yeah,
retrain. Yeah, I
yeah.
don't know
That
if
was
you saw
crazy.
that.
I thought that was a joke. I literally thought that was a joke when it
When
came
I
out. I
saw
thought
it, I felt the same. It was just ridiculous.
it really, really is. And like, it's like, sorry, I know you've spent your entire lives like doing this so far, but if you could just like get a job in like IT or something now, it's like that's fair enough if you wanted to do that until this point, but you can't just retrain your entire life. Um, for money, that way. Like this is what you have to do now. Sorry.
Yeah.
I thought, yeah, it's sad.
And I think like a post-pandemic, society without poetry and without art is going to be so boring.
I know. Can you imagine? Oh, it would
Yeah,
be honestly horrible.
it's not a future that I want to live in anyway.
No, me neither.
Um, just want to talk briefly about one of your projects that you did for the NI Human Rights Commission that I mentioned
Yes.
briefly earlier. It seems. Can you tell us a bit more about that project and why it's so important to you?
Yes, of course. So I kind of like was asked by the NI like Human Rights Commission and stuff. Like I actually got a message one day on Facebook by the guys that were filming it, and they were like, would you like we're looking this kind of like up and coming poet, a young person as well, like to write a poem on climate change. Initial imposter syndrome. I was like, I'm not an expert on climate change. I cannot do this. And the more I thought about it, I was like, actually, this is something I do always think about, and it's something I do feel really strongly about. And I was like, okay, I can so do this. So it was in partnership. It was like Amnesty, Sustainable NI, and Climate NI. And we kind of sat around a huge table down in the NI Human Rights Commission office. And I was sitting there like, oh my goodness, like writing, taking notes and statistics and everything like that. And they were like, can you just like write a poem about this? And I was like, I'll try my best. And I went away and I ended up thinking about instead of thinking about statistics and instead of thinking about things maybe people are sick of listening to, I started thinking about locally. There's a great quote actually I have by Les Ambley, the Chief Commissioner, and he said that we must think globally and act locally. Climate change impacts our own lives, and it is important that we play our role as consumers and citizens. So I was thinking little things in the poem that are local, and I mentioned, like I mentioned before, in the pre-interview, if anyone's seen it, for the film, that I mentioned my granny's daffodils blooming early in February, and these little things that are happening, and standing in Belfast filming. I talked about ivy and stuff, and I'll read my wee poem, but ivy and how it's going to consume the work, like it's going to consume us, and it's kind of going to be this like apocalyptic feel when plants take over and when we're not here anymore. And when I was standing filming that, it was so special to me because I was saying those words while standing in the middle of Belfast, thinking about these kind of monstrous Day of the Triffids type like plants that are going to consume. So that was like really special to me, and I felt really honored that they asked me to do it out of anybody they could have asked. So yeah, it was just brilliant, and anyone that's seen it, I hope you enjoyed it. The film. Yeah.
I think you said you're going to do a reading of It Seems, just for anybody that hasn't watched the film, but I totally implore anybody that hasn't, go find it on YouTube. It's just brilliant, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
And we have Niamh and Kelly in the comments here saying, love the film, so powerful.
Oh,
yeah,
thank
Stephen's
you so
just
much.
popped a link there in the comments to it. So yeah, absolutely, save it, go away and watch it. And Maria Duddy as well. Yeah, loads of love in the comments now for it.
Thank you guys. I'm so glad you love it. So this is actually my first time reading it, like that's not on film. So you know that kind of, I haven't read it in front of an audience before, so this will be fun. So this is It Seems, and this was the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission film for the climate emergency. It seems that no one chooses to care until the very air we breathe becomes infected, and the cigarette chimneys of the fuel industries fills our lungs with smog. It seems that until it arrives at our door, do we choose to ignore those fending for their lives in places that are not here, and for people who are not us within our imminent Atlantis. Yet, why is it that when we are repeatedly told we are amidst the sixth mass extinction, do we not bat an eyelid? It won't be in my lifetime anyway, is a mantra we always say, and the immediacy of our house burning down is tainted by the lack of smoke, and the joke, well, I won't be here to see it. And yes, we have been told that consuming vegan sausage rolls and refilling metal water bottles will do its part. And yes, they are a start, but let's aim our reduce, reuse, and recycling arrows away from our hearts for a minute. Let's instead point them toward those who oppose that climate change is not an issue of human rights, and shed some light on the topic that should not be up for discussion. It is often the case that facts trickle through gaps in talks, are filtered by the media, strained by companies, and diluted into a crisis that barely colours the water. Issues such as flash flooding, bushfires, and rapid global emergency feels less like our planet needs surgery and has a sniffle that sugarcoats with a cough bottle. It seems we've been told about polar ice caps too often, or rising sea levels we cannot see just yet. But my granny telling me that her daffodils bloomed early in February set alarm bells ringing, and the lack of dead insects on the car number plate after a drive seemed chilling, and warmer winters in this part of the world not seeming like that much of a struggle. There is one misconception though, and it is of this small window of time we have left. When I mention climate change, I think how strange it is we think our planet is in danger. Habitats will grow back without us, ivy will consume every brick whilst plants dismantle bridges, and our buildings will become overgrown ruins. The sea will breathe again beneath its plastic cover, and ecosystems will flourish when Mother Nature reclaims what's hers. So this comes down to our future. Our rights to water, shelter, and the very air we breathe is being determined by the greed of big companies. We need to mobilise and rise against those who keep the cure from us, who continue to burn carbon and destroy the rainforests. We must use our voices to undo the choices they make, because climate change reaches every single one of us and breaches our very right to life. Thank you.
Wow, like that's amazing. You're
Thank you
getting
so much.
love in the comments there as well. So powerful, amazing,
Thank you
stunning,
so much.
incredible, brilliant. You know, yeah, all of those adjectives, absolutely.
Thank
And
you
like
so much.
the line that always sticks out to me when I hear that is within our inland Atlantis. Just
Mhm.
that idea that, you know, we are barreling towards a disaster, and you
Yeah.
know, it's really, really powerful work.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Actually,
So
as
much
soon
for
as you
reading it.
sent me, sorry, Hannah, as soon as you sent me your illustration, that's the first line that I thought of.
Oh
Was
wow.
that kind of like underwater? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. I think it is just such a powerful image as well. Like the seas are rising, and you know, we're already losing like coastal territory to climate change. You know, it's not something that's
Mhm.
happening in the future. This is what is
Yeah,
actually happening now.
exactly.
And
Crazy.
yeah, I think what strikes me about your work is like you were saying at the start there that when you're at the commission, you know, it's about like they're talking about statistics and things like
Mhm.
that, like that usually most of us when we hear our eyes kind of glaze over and
Yeah,
things
yeah,
like that.
exactly.
And I'm really, you know, struck by how your work is almost like making these issues more accessible to people. And, you know, I'm just
Thank
wondering, is
you.
that something that you kind of set out to do, or did that just kind of come naturally?
Um, it kind of in a way it kind of comes natural, Hannah, because it's the only way I am able to understand. And like I said, if I'm not economic, statistic minded, I never have been. So it's when I see the physicalities of everyday life and what things are going to happen. You look at, for example, a lighthouse. What's that going to look like when the sea levels do rise and we're all underwater? What way will the earth look? And when you think about it, it is the local, like Les said, the chief commissioner is, it is the local, it is the things that kind of when they arrive at your door, you don't really care, you don't care until they do. And I kind of, the first line of my poem is it seems that nobody chooses to care until the air we breathe. And that was in relation to COVID as well, because people didn't think COVID was going to affect us until it did. And I have that view of no one will actually care until, the waters at their front door, or the bushfires create so much toxic air that we can't breathe. Or so these little imageries, I think we're quite alike as well, from like just observing stuff and putting it onto a page, and we do it in very different ways, of course. But it is that, like, say what you see, and I think that's how I write poetry.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, your work really is helping to make people care about it and make them realize it is going to affect them. And, you know, even just looking in the chat, you can see how people are affected by it.
Thank
I was just wondering if you have any advice for people if they're sitting here and they're feeling empowered and they also want to create creative work based maybe around climate change or even other
you.
issues like that. What would your advice
Yes.
be to them?
My advice, this is so difficult because I don't feel like I have the right to give anyone advice. But I can say that there's one thing that I have kept as a mantra throughout, like since I was probably small and reading like Heaney, and it's a quote that he says, and it's, if you have the words, there's always a chance you'll find the way. And I think that if you have an idea, if you have something that you want to say, just do it. And honestly, because there's a certain amount of imposter syndrome you can have, or like putting yourself off it, or a lot of people, especially when they're younger, think that they don't have a voice and think that their voice isn't important. But we know what it's like when young people have a voice. We've seen the school strikes, we see what happens when people have an idea and follow it. And also, if you are like, I think in our generational, there's a lot of, if you've got like TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, there's a lot of filming going on. And it's like, see, if you film and you put it like a film together, that could be like something that's a creation, that's something you could put into the world and make your voice heard as well. But I just think like the biggest thing to say is just follow the idea you have and don't let anybody tell you that you're not going to make it, because I think that's a very capitalistic view as well, like of an artist as well. Like, when have you made it? If you're like economically, like sustainable, that's not the truth. It's like, if you follow what you want to do and don't let anybody stop you, and never undermine yourself.
Yeah, I think So and John kind of touched on that yesterday when they were saying about, you know, art doesn't always have to be commercially viable. But, you
Yeah,
know,
of
that's the
course.
point. Like, you know,
Like
it's about, you know, making people feel and changing minds and things like
yeah.
that. And that sounds like exactly what you're talking about.
Exactly,
Absolutely.
that's totally it. Just do it. I'm sure, are you the same with like drawing and stuff? Did you just like always just draw?
Yeah, I think I'm the same as you with that, like having an idea and just running
Yeah.
with it and seeing where it goes. And I'm
Mhm.
totally the same with not looking for like success in
Yeah.
whatever people tell you that that is. It is
Yeah.
for me just making people feel something and kind
Yeah.
of, changing minds and,
Mhm.
sparking a feeling in somebody is
Yeah.
more what I'm trying to aim to do with my work,
Yeah.
definitely.
That's so good. And like I think drawing and visuals are so sometimes so much more, you know, like like I said earlier, it's you really bring the poem to life with your visuals and stuff. But actually just because like we are saying about ideas, I have another wee quote here that I love and it's one of my favorite poets. If you don't know her, check her out. Her name's Nina Loy. And it is about poetry and it's about an idea as well. And it's poetry is prose bewitched, a music made of visual thoughts, the sound of an idea. And I think that encapsulates a lot, you know, just like let it like put it out into the world, you know. You never know what could happen.
And you're back.
Yeah, sorry.
No worries. I think it says my internet connection is unstable, so maybe it's me.
Oh, really good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just like put it out into the world. Go for it. That's all my advice.
Yeah, definitely. And like, I know that your medium's poetry, but it's almost like no matter what you feel drawn to, or even if you don't feel drawn to like one particular medium,
Yeah,
explore, like try anything,
exactly.
just
Yes.
get your message out there and get what you're feeling out there. I
Yes.
think the rest will come in time.
I agree. I totally agree.
Um, so like poetry as well, like, that is your medium. That's the one that
Mhm.
you've gravitated towards. And it's really kind of had quite a revival recently, especially amongst young people. Like, why do you think that is and why is it so appealing?
I know. I'm just such like a big advocate. I'm like poetry. Um, honestly, I think like poetry, I don't know how to describe it. I think it can get across like you can read novels and novels, right? I have done in my life, but I think like when you read a poem, it strikes a certain chord, like it really like hits you. Like with my own poetry, it's like it's quite short. So it's like getting as much like kind of if it's like profound thoughts or whatever, it doesn't even need to be that. But it's like images, it's ways of looking at the world outside of, like I said, the classic like tone lines. But I think poetry, people are always going to be drawn to it. It's this kind of thing that makes your soul sing, I suppose. Um, but you're right, like with the whole revival, it's crazy. Like I was on the BBC 2 years ago, and by that stage, it was like over a 6 year period, and it was like I was on a featurette set called "Making Poetry Cool Again." But it was apparently at that stage, it was poetry sales over 6 years had risen like 40% for like people under 34. So it must, I think it's a thing with young people too, where they feel like words are powerful and get them out there, and poetry I think is one of the best mediums for that. And yeah, I'm just in love with it. I feel like it's the best way I'm able to express myself. I'm a horrible prose writer. I couldn't write like prose to save my life, but poetry just kind of comes naturally, and I think a lot of people feel that way.
Absolutely. And I think as well, it's like, very like accessible. You
Hmm.
don't have to spend hours almost reading that whole
Yeah,
novel, or, it's
exactly.
not like, looking at like old oil paintings. We have to have like knowledge of all the
Yeah,
symbolism and stuff. It's just,
yeah,
you come to it as you are, you read it and you feel what you feel. So I think
that's
it's
it.
like, very low barrier to entry almost.
Yeah, exactly. And it is accessible and dependent, like you can be as kind of pretentious and like not at all as you want to be. Like there's a big spectrum like in between. But the thing is like you can go down and just get poems that you feel like reading that day. Like if you go into Waterstones and you see like a wee book of poetry and you don't want to read, like you said, you don't want to read novels upon novels. And you can just want that like wee feeling, or like Insta poetry is such a thing now as well, because people like quotes, or like Ruby Carr and people like that, and just like love quotes or love a couple of phrases, and that's a poem and that's okay. And it's like something that makes you feel good that day or maybe inspires you. And yeah, people love a good quote as well. It's just like it's it.
Yeah, I definitely think there's that parallel as well with social media, and
Yeah.
whether it's because of time constraints or
Mhm.
because people just don't want to. People are almost like
Yeah.
more drawn to like small content. They want
Yeah,
something that
I
they can
agree.
read quickly and kind of
Uh-huh.
absorb quickly.
I
And I think
agree.
poetry is just perfect for that kind of social media age where it's like
Yeah.
instant. but still really powerful. We're not losing anything,
100%. I totally agree. And it's great for a wee share as well. You're like, feeling this today.
Yeah,
Share it.
absolutely. This next question I'm excited about because I get to talk about David Attenborough. And I
Yes.
love David Attenborough, absolute babe. It's like, I think his work and him joining Instagram and
Yes.
he's just always made like ecology and the environment just so accessible for people,
Oh,
whether it's
100%.
through TV or now like joining social media, he's on Netflix and all that.
Yeah.
He's done Planet Earth and Our Planet and stuff like that. And one of your recent poems called A Devastating Scene was inspired by a scene from Our Planet. Do you want to just talk to us a wee bit more about that and why you were so inspired by that?
Of course. So basically I was watching Our Planet and I'd watched it and then I rewatched it recently, just kind of coming up to these talks, and I was like, there was a scene where these walruses were there was no more ice, it was off the coast of Russia. It was like the Baltic, and it was like they were trying to they had nowhere else to sit. All the ice had basically melted. So it was actually I don't know if you've seen the Hannah, it was like behind the scenes of the camera people watching, and it was through their eyes as well. And they were just watching these walruses climb this cliff. And it's there was a quote that the guy said, and I was like, they're not made for climbing cliffs. You know what they look like. They aren't able to do that. But to get out of, it's called hauling out, and to get out of the water to escape predators, they needed to sit somewhere. They needed to go. And next thing you know, they're climbing up this cliff, this really steep incline. And they all start falling, hundreds of these, spread across the beach. Hundreds of walruses puncture it was puncturing each other, suffocating each other, falling. And honestly, it broke my heart, and I actually posted it on Facebook because it a couple of weeks ago got published by New World Writing, and I had said that this is the only way that I felt that I could respond to that and share their story and make sure people know that this is happening. So I called it A Devastating Scene, and this was actually taken from the Guardian article about the poem. And would you like me to read it now? Do you want me to read it now?
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
This is a devastating scene. Did you watch that walrus scene on screen, plummeting to their deaths one by one? A tragedy of bodies piled at the base of an 80-foot cliff. Tusks puncture blubber, ivory impales backs, bellies, eyes. Life runs from leathery coats into Russian waters under Arctic skies. Skulls crack on wetted rocks, stacking the beach with figures of furrowed blocks. Wrinkled blobs morph into a mass grave of hemorrhaging greys and browns. Nothing to do but watch. Straight into our lens, your flippers extend, a tilt from the rock face then spread into a crucifixion pose, a vain execution. A limp creature in slow motion begins its death descent. We watch the body's contortion defeated by the steep incline, the lack of grip, a final tumble, a blind stumble, the hauling out to the water, the stupidity of it all, the fall. Why are they doing this? They aren't made for climbing cliffs. They had nowhere else to go, you replied. They had nowhere else to sit.
Is so the word is devastating. I think you have hit the nail on the head because I've seen the footage that you're talking about, and
It's horrible.
It's horrible, and you also feel the guilt knowing that we've kind of contributed to this. This is not normal.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think one thing is that it can feel really disheartening and discouraging to try to change it after you've watched that, whether it's watching David Attenborough talking about it, or seeing pictures of undernourished polar bears on the internet or things like that. We're surrounded by almost the guilt of what we're doing to the planet. How do you think we can use this as a tool for positive change when it is something that feels just so horrible and so negative?
Yeah. Honestly, I think you're totally right, Hannah, as well. You can kind of feel hopeless when you watch things like that. It's how do we reverse that? But really, I like the kind of terms like eco-sympathy and eco-empathy. And, I think the way we both watched that and it kind of affected us, I think that can only lead to people being more empathetic and more emotional. And I think that will lead to change. I can't imagine one person being able to like John Barry said yesterday, feeling bad if you don't recycle or something, But it is that feeling of, now I feel something, I need to make a difference, and it isn't hopeless. Like, we're still here right now. Just try the best you can, and I think that's the positive to come from it. Learn, feel, and I think that's where the education will come, when you feel those emotions, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And even just, with it seems like
Mhm.
that idea of pointing the finger at the
Yeah.
politicians and the corporations
Yeah.
who are driving this, like,
Mhm.
we can do what we can do. But
Exactly.
at the end of the day, if, BP is spilling tons of oil into the ocean and
Yes.
Amazon is pumping out CO2 into the air and,
Yeah.
things like that,
Yes.
we need to be changing that first as well.
Yeah, I agree, because it is looking higher as well, and I noticed when we were talking before as well, like things like eco anxiety and stuff come across, and we'll talk like that. But it is that thing where it is out of our hand. It's like, what point? People do have this kind of futile view. It's like, what if I eat like a vegan, like, I don't know, steak bake from Greg's? It's like, these companies are like, the US rejoined the Paris Agreement, like just as Biden got in, like these mega dollar worth companies are destroying the planet, burning carbon. And I actually thought it was really interesting yesterday when um they were talking about, like seeing things in your house that haven't been like transported by some sort of like fossil fuel or like carbon. I think that's so interesting too. Just making those little changes every day, but not putting too much pressure on yourself either.
Yeah, is eco anxiety, just because you mentioned it there, is that something that you've personally felt, and is it something that you've maybe even used to kind of
Yeah.
fuel your work?
Yeah, I actually I feel it quite a bit, to be honest. I don't know if you're the same. It's kind of, it comes all of a sudden sometimes when you're sitting and you're like, whoa, what are we actually doing? And watching things like our planet, and you're like, oh my goodness, like what are we actually doing here? Like, we're not going to survive. But with regards to my work and nature focused poetry, I wrote a poem. I'm actually, there's like so much poems, but I wrote a poem called Ivy, and like I said, about like the consumption element, and it was about kind of ivy coming over the back wall and coming for the house, this kind of fear that we're going to like be overtaken, or there's going to be like this post-apocalyptic type world where we're going to be left or drowned, or so definitely I do feel eco anxiety for real, like for real, because it's a thing, and our futures are basically being taken away from us. There's, if you think you're having eco anxiety and you're being dramatic, it's not the case. It's real and it's happening.
Yeah, it is a very real, like, mental health issue that is
Mhm.
affecting loads of people,
Of course.
of all different ages. How do you think that people can kind of balance that kind of feeling of anxiety and guilt with good mental health?
Yeah, so like I said, don't feel bad about feeling this, because it's definitely something that is real, and it's happening. But a lot of time just being like a poet and stuff, and like words can also kind of make a difference, where if you switch the terminology a little bit. I actually found this really good article by Friends of the Earth, and they called eco anxiety, and they said it can also be seen as eco empathetic or eco compassionate. If you think about that, I think that relates to like the walrus poem too. It's like, if you feel this, make a difference, feel empathetic towards the planet, towards the non-human world. Also, like strategic things, like instead of sitting at home, get outside, reconnect with the nature you're fighting for. And I think that's like really prevalent in COVID, when people are just going on like walks just to get into nature and, you know, feel better about themselves. Also, there's so many like groups that you can talk to. You can talk to different like climate like groups, activists online, people with the same mindset. And maybe you could get together and like do something for the planet, or just like voice your opinion. But also, I think like if you are really you can like seek professional help with anxiety too, if it gets too bad, because it is a thing and it is affecting people really strongly, especially young people.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely that kind of feeling of getting back into nature and reconnecting, especially at the moment, like
Yeah.
going on my mandatory like one walk a day, and
Yeah.
trying to get out, even though it's horrible weather at the moment and it's not like very welcoming, but just kind of feeling close to nature and connected
Mhm.
to the planet that we're trying to save and trying to be so empathetic to,
Yes,
definitely.
defo.
Going to move on a wee bit
Yes.
from kind of mental health to the more kind of heritage view of the environment.
Mhm.
What part do you think museums can play in the discussion around climate change going forward?
So like I absolutely, for one, like love museums. I love them so much. But I think like symbolically, like what museums represent are, epicenters for facts, science, history, knowledge. And I think that is something that we really need in this day and age with the climate discussion. People to this day don't agree or don't even try to believe in the science. And I think like through like going to museums, learning, that can only be for good. Um, Something that I did come across, and actually read a poem about it because it was such a coincidence. Like before you guys asked me to speak, a couple of months ago, I was on the Museum's NI page, and I was like looking for things that I started having this idea of, re-mythologizing the land, like rewriting poetry for like old myths and legends from Ireland. And I was like, oh my goodness, like I could maybe, think about doing this or having a sort of upcycle, if that makes sense. And I came across, I actually have it, it's Myra Zimpf, and she was doing a talk in the Ulster Folk Museum called Upcycling Mythology, Rewriting Legends for New Times. And that's like a talk that's happening, if it's still happening, I'm not too sure, in a couple of days. So I was like, this is so cool. And clearly museums are putting on talks like this for climate discussion, which is so great. I also have, because I wanted to like poetically mythologize the land, I have poems that I've written for Bushmills, which was the If Stone Could Speak. I could read that if you want me to, if we have enough time and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely, go for it.
So this was a poem I got asked to write for the Causeway collection. And I kind of wanted it to write, instead of, like the story obviously of like Finn McCool and stuff, I want to write it from the stones, and that, like if they could speak, what would their story be? And I think this is a really great way of eco writing, where you're like speaking maybe on behalf of nature, and like giving it a purpose, if that makes sense. um so I wrote this, and it's called If Stone Could Speak, but I also had like a bit of a feminist twist at the end, where I'm standing metaphorically on the Giant's Causeway with um Finn's mum Murren, and then is like wife Una and stuff, just kind of looking out. So this is If Stone Could Speak. If stone could speak, it would tell how the Antrim glens were halted by a basalt forest of hexagons forged and welded by earth fire. A crucible of molten lava was
Have we lost Niamh?
It looks like it, yeah. I didn't know if that was
just a
me or her.
Oh, Niamh, I think we lost you for a
Oh,
minute.
sorry, is my internet?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you're gone again.
Oh, there we go. Am I lagging?
A wee bit, yeah.
Sorry, this internet's a curse.
It's just live TV, isn't it? I think you're back now.
Am I back now?
Oh, still a wee bit shaky.
But like a wee bit robotic.
Am I back now? I know.
You're back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sorry, it's internet technological curse. So yeah, just the last wee part of this poem, if you can hear me okay.
Yep.
My lungs are a cask, pried open by an enchanted past, forcing centuries of distilled air in. Beginning high and wide, your pillared stumps narrow, and point an ancient arrow under the North Channel. This is where all roads end, sunken, buried. Ghostly travellers and ancient souls linger in stone, flickering silhouettes eternally peering from an unbridled shore. Looking to the northern sky, I am joined by Una and Finn's mother Murren, and breathe in how mysticism weaves through reason. Thank you.
Wow.
So that's kind of my
amazing.
view of like, the land.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. I just find it really haunting for some reason. I just really enjoyed that. Yeah, I think you also wanted to read out the Half Moon Lake, if you have that.
Yes. be.
Oh, you're lagging again. Oh no.
I know. Is that okay now? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, so the Half Moon Lake is also, it's actually the last poem I'm going to be reading today. Finally, you can get rid of me. And it's about this lake that actually is in the middle. If anybody's from West Belfast, it's like in the middle of this huge like cul-de-sac. And it's like, if you didn't know it was there, like I didn't know it was there until like 2 years ago. So I went there like on walks and stuff like through lockdown. I think like you said, Hannah, it's a good way to get out into nature and stuff. And as soon as I come out of this lake, I could see like this mural of like a famine, like a big famine mural, just like on this wall. And this is like, we're heritage and kind of like, obviously with the World Heritage Site with the Giant's Causeway, but this is history, and like history, maybe people dealing with their situations and me dealing with mine. Now, obviously it's not a famine, but it's my way of kind of combining nature and that kind of idea. So this is the Half Moon Lake. A segment of sun peels through the split sky this winter. I leave to find air. Stepping into blinding rays, they lure me into a November frost that extracts my lung dust. Water, spiraling paths, a lunar lake. Solstice reflects off the ponds as I roam through unchurned buttercups. I pretend to tug one off and shine it under my chin. Barbed wire jaggy nettles expose shards of emerald ice smashed from the night before. Scentless mint defends daisies who look up at me. They cry out for heat as though bent in front of a failing fire. I must continue and ignore their pleas. Trees greet me with their confetti that I trample into the gravel. Other leaves are blood splattered with reds and pinks and orange tips. Some stragglers hold on for dear life. Leaving the forest, a washed out mural on a bricked wall presents a backdrop for this walk. It tells me of hunger, blight, and lack of light in days much darker than this. Thank you.
I just like love what you're saying before as well about, you know, getting together with other people and kind of making work and sharing it and trying to like organize and, you know, or organize around like the climate crisis. And I'm just really struck by that as you were reading those poems about all of us kind of being here to listen to your work and to talk about it. So thank you so much for reading your work today. It's been really lovely.
Oh my God, thank you.
I kind of
thank you
want
so much.
to just sort of end on like maybe a positive and just kind of think about the future of like our planet and, you know, how do you think change will come about, and do you think that poetry is going to have a role in the revolution as well?
I hope so. I hope poetry has a role. I hope it has more of a role. I think it should lead the revolution, the green revolution. But like my hopes for the future, really, it's like survival. I know that's like kind of broad, but I think, would you agree that's like kind of the main thing with regards to climate is like the human race surviving. And my hopes are that, like John said yesterday as well, like I hope when we get out of COVID, like the COVID restrictions, people just don't return to normality. People actually want to make a difference. There's like a list of things I want to happen. I want people to eat less meat or like cut meat out altogether. I would like, if it was possible, for everyone to live in a huge commune, but I don't think that could happen, or like live in eco-pods. But I kind of, on a positive, there is hope and there is time. There's very little time, but there is time to make a difference. And it's about getting out there, it's about lobbying, it's about holding the people account who actually can make the decisions and should be trying harder. But on a personal level, don't get your, I think like obviously there's hope, but don't be getting yourself too stressed out. I think that's a big thing. I don't be like putting too much pressure on yourself, but know that when you do these things, it will make a difference. Just little everyday things like turning off a light, like stop maybe buying so much, stop consuming so much, and just think about your choices. I think that's what we need to come away from. And yeah, write. If you're a writer, write. Filmmaker, poet, screenwriter, artist, just do it. Go out and show your work to the world.
Absolutely. I'm going to take a second to gush a wee bit about Reimagine as well, because RRR has been like an amazing platform to kind of organize and do that. And, you know, I wouldn't be here interviewing you if not for that. So that's been really cool. And yeah, if anybody takes anything away from today, it is probably go out, write, draw, film,
exactly.
do whatever you do, and go out and make a statement. Really, yeah, we want to empower people today. We want people going out and writing lots of eco poetry and doing illustrations to go with it. Let's go.
Get your collections out, get them into Waterstones, publish them yourself.
Yeah, and then we'll all come back here in a year and like buy everybody's copies that they put out there.
Definitely. We could start a wee like poetry reading or like book club.
Oh, that'd be amazing. Let's actually do that. I think we're going to have a bit of a Q&A. If anybody has any questions, just fire them in the chat, just anything at all. Yeah, we're going to take some time just to answer questions if anybody has any.
I was going to ask Niamh, sorry, where could people find more of your work?
Honestly, so see if you want to I upload any journal or magazine I've been published in on like Twitter. So if you even want to follow me on Twitter, some like self-promotion as well at Niamh McNally. But yeah, my work can kind of be found in like the Galway Review. It's been published like in Tulsa a couple of times in the Tulsa Review. There's like a list of other like magazines and stuff, and I can send anybody them that wants to read. I'm also working on collections now, so and writing as much as I can. So fingers crossed someday I'll have a collection to myself that I can promote.
Brilliant. I can see that Emma's put a question in the Q&A. It says, actually it's to both of you, so I can ask it. What is the first thing you will do when lockdown ends creatively? So whichever of you wants to answer that first.
Do you want to go for it, Hannah?
I know, you go on ahead.
As soon as lockdown's over, honestly, like I know this sounds really like creatively, I just want to go to the north coast and be beside the sea and be out of Belfast, because not that Belfast isn't the most inspiring place in the world, but sometimes it's nice to be in nature again and at the beach and in the countryside or whatever. But creatively just write as much as I can. I don't know, that could be like a question I could maybe ask everyone, if there's any artists and stuff out there, like did anyone struggle through the lockdown? Because I definitely know I did with creativity. I found that I just read a lot and tried to build up that way, kind of do something. But Hannah, were you the same, or like did you
yeah, that's kind of why I let you go first, is because the struggle has been real, and it's like creatively when I'm asked that question, what are you going to do creatively, it's like, oh, I don't know, because I've just been sitting around doing not very much of anything. Like I think that illustration that I did for your work is one of the first times where it has been like, I've had that kind of motivation, because it has been more of a social thing, more of a collaborative thing, and it's like, oh, I miss that so much. So I'm probably gonna, when lockdown ends, be that like weird, overly social person who wants to like hang with everybody and be like, what art are you making? Let me have a look at your work. Like, I probably want to like get out and travel a wee bit as well, because I had money saved up to go on holiday and everything like that before, and it's just like that has been in my head the whole lockdown. It's like I could be on holiday, I could be elsewhere, and I think I get so inspired when I'm like in other cultures and just experiencing other people's kind of way of life and being in nature elsewhere. So probably end up doing that.
Even stories, like meeting people. I know it sounds so bad, and sorry if like anyone that's on this don't drink, but bars, like being and talking to like other creatives, shout out Sunflower Bar, is like the place. But it's like getting out and like meeting new people or talking to others, and that's what inspires me, really, just stories, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were saying Sunflower there, I think, and there was like a couple of weeks when lockdown was lifted and we were allowed to go to bars and restaurants, and I was in the Sunflower, and it's like,
I know,
trying to take those wee things that we got to do in the break and using them to kind of fuel you creatively. I feel like the months and months of lockdown is...
Someone talk to me.
And we've got an open invitation in the chat there to the beautiful coast of Culdaff, Donegal, so that's great.
I'm up for that. I'm game.
Yeah, me too.
Bags
We'll all
packed.
just land in Donegal after this.
That would be honestly a dream, I swear.
Yeah. I'd be happy to go anywhere that isn't the end of the road at the moment, you know.
I agree.
We have one other question, and it is from Maria. And the question is, who or what has been your most influential from an early age?
Or what?
I'm going to just put it to both of you as well.
Oh.
Oh, you go for it, Anna.
For me, it's like probably not like one artist or, you know, anything like that that's really influenced me, because I feel like that's constantly changing, like who I'm looking at and the work that I like. I think it's maybe more things like nature, those big constants, you know, that big constants in the way that nature is always there, but it is always changing as well. It is like a source of endless inspiration for me. And like I was saying, you know, when you're traveling and things like that, it's completely different. And yeah, I've always found that a big influence, but also I think it's really helped me. Kind of talked about this earlier, somebody put in the chat about how parents can discourage people from following creative careers. My mom's been amazing. Like she was a theatre student when she was younger, so no worries about her kids doing the arts or anything like that. She knew the struggle. So having that kind of base to jump off from, where you know that there are people out there who appreciate art and creativity and things like that. And that's really allowed me to like talk to other people and try to find that kind of artistic community and never worry that that wasn't out there. So that's probably been my kind of influences. What about you, Niamh?
Yeah, I honestly, the exact same, just as you saying that, like my family have never like discouraged in that way. They're not particularly like creatives themselves, but my sister and I couldn't be like more opposite. We're like drama, like, you know, writing, and they've always pushed us to do that. And that's what's so scary about the poll earlier as well. That was just like so many people were discouraged. And I think that's sad as well, especially at home. It's one thing getting discouraged maybe at school, or maybe like pushed in another direction, but to be encouraged at home is the best thing. And I would always encourage people to like pursue the arts. But with regards to like influences, this is such a weird one for me, because it just comes anytime. And I don't even know where like my brain's at half the time, staring out the window. But like sometimes, like my daddy said like the other week, he's like, where do you even come up with these ideas? And I'm like, I don't even know. They just come into my head sometimes. Or if I'm watching something, or someone says something to me. And a lot of the time my work, like the Heaney poem, I kind of like responding almost, not necessarily copying, but like responding to poets that are not with us anymore. And just, yeah, just kind of doing my own thing. But yeah, influences can come at any time, anywhere. And that's why lockdown's so difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's been difficult during lockdown to almost find that, like you're having to find your creative community online. And
Yeah.
you were saying about the polls there as well. I think it's so sad that, you know, people have been discouraged, and hopefully they're not listening. You know, I hope you don't listen to that. I hope you go out there and you find a creative community full of people who'll support you. And you know, like, or if your parents aren't supportive about it or something, almost go find your adoptive art parents, you know. Yeah, go find people who will be there and support you even when other people, you know, don't necessarily understand, because that's really important, I think.
And if you don't know anybody, just like tweet us and we'll like support you.
I'll be your adoptive art mom. I'm totally up for that.
Brilliant. Listen, thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Really beautiful poems,
Thank you.
really beautiful reading. Hannah, that was fantastic. Like it was also like it's hard to balance such difficult subject matter. Like I mean, like I'm the biggest Walrus fan in the world. They're like that was really heartbreaking but really moving. But actually also it's very motivating to listen to you both speak so passionately and creatively. And yeah, I think it is really important to like just to connect with people. You know, like that question, like what are you going to do afterwards? Like connecting with people, because we've lost it a little bit. So like my advice is kind of like just today, bring your mate, like just give them a call, because we all need that. Go for a walk, and find yourselves, because like this is still tough.
Yeah.
But that was really beautiful and really moving. Thank you both.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Hannah.
Yeah, and thank you, Niamh, for sharing your work. It's been like a really chill, like, you know, poetry cafe vibe to today, and I've really loved
I
it.
know we should have like berets on.
I think so too.
Bongos. Thank you so much, both of you.
And thank you
Thank
to
you.
everyone who has taken part and asked questions and kept the chat lit. Tomorrow we are back with Claire Bailey being interviewed. Claire Bailey, who is leader of the Green Party, obviously, being interviewed by Kiva Clements. And signups are still open for that. But yeah, it's Saturday. Get yourself a parrot balloon.
Woohoo!
Go for a walk. Bring your friend. Look after yourselves. I'll see you all tomorrow. Slan, slan.
Slan, slan.